Lon Chaney's gonna get you if you don't watch out. He's liable to pounce upon you with a shout. Perhaps he's a spider, perhaps he's a cat. Lon Chaney's gonna get you if you don't watch out.
I can only say he was a genius. Whatever part that he played, he was that part.
Lon Chaney was an actor made for the movies of the 1920s, a period of silent imagery and visual imagination. He made 150 films between 1913 and his death in 1930. A majority of them were unforgettable because of the variety of characters he played, many of them grotesque and physically demanding, like the deformed organist in the 1925 Phantom of the Opera.
He did all his own makeup, and it was pretty horrible, you know.
Yes, a whole lot.
Oh, I don't know how he did it himself, but he did.
I absolutely became a makeup artist because of Lon Chaney. He was my inspiration. He was the guy that gave me a career. There were times when I'd get stuck on something and I'd say, what would Lon do? And I'd look in my case and I'd find the answer.
My introduction to Lon Chaney came about because of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. And in fact, the issue I saw had Chaney as the Phantom of the Opera on the cover. When I found that magazine, I thought it was a gift from the gods. I just became fascinated by his face. I learned how to make scary faces from looking at Lon Chaney.
He is the grandfather of what I do today. I am fascinated by him. I am mesmerized by him. I revere him. I almost worship the man because Lon Chaney was a genius, period, the end.
Chaney stood up for the best interests of the crews he worked with and was generous with money and advice. One man he helped was Boris Karloff.
He, of all people, gave him the best single piece of advice he had ever been given. It was at a time when my father was certainly an unknown, struggling actor and a bit discouraged, and Chaney Sr. gave him a lift home. And in the car, my father was asking his advice, and Chaney Sr. said to him, "The best advice I can give you is to find something no one else can do, and do it better than anybody else can do it, and you'll leave your mark."
Leonardus Frank Chaney was born in Colorado Springs on April 1st, 1883, the second son of Frank and Emma Chaney. Both his parents were deaf, Emma from birth, Frank due to a childhood bout of typhoid fever, and so, from an early age, Lon learned to express himself without speech.
Lon Chaney always said his childhood was reasonably happy, but he had a difficult time.
The first part of his life, from what I understand, has been passed down through the family. He didn't speak for the first several years of his life because he grew up in this world of silence outside of, the children. Let me state, the children didn't have any affliction as far as deafness goes. So the noise around the house was only by the children. The parents were quite silent.
When Lon was in 4th grade, Emma Chaney was stricken with inflammatory rheumatism, which would leave her bedridden for the next 3 years. While his father and elder brother went out to work, young Lon dropped out of school to care for his mother. Every day he entertained her, told her stories, kept her up to date with local news, not just with sign language, but with pantomime, gesture and facial expression, unknowingly honing the skills that would make him such a unique talent.
Chaney could do the most subtle thing with his face, and it would just hit you. You would feel the emotion. He was a master at that. Growing up with deaf parents, it helped his miming skills, because he learned to express through his face.
He respected the visual communication in this world. That's what he relied on with his own parents as a child growing up. So I'm sure he knew how to get a point across with a look.
Unknowingly honing the skills that would make him such a unique talent. When elder brother John Chaney got a job at the local opera house as a stagehand, he brought his younger brother along, working as a prop boy for 25 cents a night. From here, he worked his way up and made his acting debut in 1902 in The Little Tycoon. It is in a review for this show that we first find Leonardis referred to by his more familiar name. Lon Chaney provoked laughter whenever he appeared on the stage, and his dancing was welcomed with loud acclamations of approval. It's a far cry from the Lon Chaney of Hunchback and Phantom. The only comedy film he made at his peak was also one of the few horror films he made, playing a mad scientist in 1925's The Monster, also one of his worst films of this period. For the next 10 years, Chaney toured as a theatre actor, largely in musical comedy. He married Claver Creighton, and their son, Creighton Tull Chaney, arrived swiftly after.
Chaney not only acted, he was choreographer, wardrobe supervisor, and stage manager. But the marriage was endangered by Cleaver's flirtatiousness.
Cleaver was very headstrong, and so was Lon. Jealousies arose, so he was teaching ballet dances and working with the female roles as well. So I'm sure lots of misunderstandings.
And by the time they came out to Los Angeles, Cleaver was still performing with him in various shows, but then she started to branch out. She took a singing job at one of the local cabarets in Los Angeles. Unfortunately, she developed a very bad habit of drinking.
When Chaney prepared to leave with the Kolb and Dill Company, they had a furious argument about who was to look after Creighton. Cleaver refused.
She had been on some various medicines that were prescribed for her nerves at that time, and she went. I think they couldn't resolve this. They had separated for a time before this event took place. They tried to reconcile.
So after she finished her show, she walked over to the Majestic Theater in downtown Los Angeles, and standing in the wings of the theater, swallowed a vial of bichloride of mercury. It didn't kill her, but it did kill her singing career. And they separated in May after Chaney was assured that she would survive.
Once the newspapers printed details of the scandal, Chaney could not stay in the theatre. He was forced into the moving picture business. Chaney became one of hundreds of actors trying to get work, but he had the edge on the rest because of his skill with makeup. This was the makeup case he used at Universal. It was an ordinary lunchbox, but out of it, Chaney conjured an extraordinary gallery. He had his makeups photographed so that he could judge what worked and what didn't on film. These were stills Chaney sent home to his brother. Sometimes he was recognizable, but often he had to indicate which part he played. I was playing a wild man. This is me, just below the X sign. Here I am a Russian prince.
This was a whole new ball game, and rules were being written every day with every makeup.
Physical things that Chaney did, say as the Hunchback, with all that stuff on his face, had to be constantly repaired, I'm sure, and very difficult for him to do. And I've learned to like the makeup a lot more. And now that I actually saw the whole film, it is a part of film history and classic makeup history.
He went to Victor Hugo's book, and he read the character description. And if you read the description, and you see the movie, Quasimodo walks right off the pages into Chaney's makeup. What people tend to forget as time goes on is how unique or novel a film or a character, or in Chaney's case, the makeup of Quasimodo was. Nobody had really tried anything unique with makeup, and here you have this guy who is basically a human gargoyle.
He had a 20-pound hump on his back. He built these huge cheekbones. He built that fake eye over himself.
The cheekbones were made out of cotton and collodion method. He had a little bit of nose putty here on his tip of his nose, fake eyebrows glued over his own eyebrows, his wig, and the false teeth. Nobody had done this before. This is what the audience was feeling in 1923 as well. They'd never seen anything like this.
Unnerved 1920s moviegoers. Growing up on the Universal lot, Carl Laemmle's niece experienced the actor's intensity firsthand.
That was unforgettable for me to see him do that and to see him in makeup. And, you know, with the hunch on his back, you know, and all of these things that he had to wear to deform his face. This was painful, but he would do anything to achieve what he wanted.
He convinced me, even though I was 3 years old, that there was a hunchback somewhere in me. There was a shadow of this hunchback, even though I was a normal kid. But my feelings for him were so terrific that I burst into tears.
The Hunchback established Chaney as Hollywood's outstanding character star. The Phantom is at first sketched in by suggestion. People thought Universal mad. Were they really paying Chaney to play a shadow?
I mean, you can always tell Chaney, no matter how much makeup he's got on, you can tell it's Chaney by the use of his hands.
Chaney's contract prescribed all photographs of the unmasked Phantom to ensure the strongest possible impact in the theatre.
Phantom of the Opera was the one that I saw that just really struck me because I just thought it was such a brilliant makeup.
Chaney created one of the most frightening faces ever put on the screen. He prepared much of his makeup on this wax model of his head, using cotton and collodion to create face pieces.
It would take Chaney about 2, maybe 3 hours to put the makeup on. And for Phantom, Eric is described as looking like a human skull.
He was trying to turn himself into basically a living skeleton.
For the up-tilted nose, he used a strip of fish skin, which was very hardy. He would glue it down with spirit gum, run it up here, up to his head, and then under the head cap, he would take and use adhesive tape to hold it down.
I think the nose thing was what really just changed his entire look. The discomfort of that. Now, I've had my nose smashed before, and I remember specifically had a vacuform piece that kind of smashed my nose down so my human nose wouldn't show through. At the end of the day, when that came off, my nose would swell and become like a tomato because it was finally getting some blood flow again. Lon did that to himself on purpose and made it as pushed and smashed and uncomfortable as possible. I can only imagine the hell he must have gone through for that.
Glued his ears against his head to make him less obvious, you know, had a padded cap to raise the top of his head. He had his cheekbones built up, great paint work on his face.
Then he had the set of teeth, and the rest was all highlights and shadows of the makeup. And Lon said sometimes it was putting the shadows or the highlights where you wouldn't expect that made the makeup effective.
But there's a humanity to it, and there's a reality to it that I think you lose in modern makeups if you put too much stuff on the person's face. You know, you can build up so much, you eventually lose the actor, and you can lose some of the expression. That's why I think his makeups still look great. You know, they hold up today.
There's a story that Mary Philbin fainted when she took off his mask. It could have been true because it was enough to make anybody faint.
London After Midnight is probably one of the most sought-after lost films of the silent era.
I saw London After Midnight. Lon played a straight part of a detective who dresses up as a vampire, and the vampire is terrible. He had a huge grin, long hair and a top hat, and walked along in a sort of crawling way. That was a fantasy. It was so unreal, but the makeup was terrific.
He had thin wires that fitted around his eyes so that it would give this hypnotic stare. Then he had a set of upper and lower false teeth. The upper portion had a wire that would hold the corners of his mouth open to give it kind of a fixated grin. And that was it, and a wig, and the characterization itself.
It was an interesting choice for a vampire to not go with the typical two-fanged look, but a full row of reptilian sharp teeth. The scraggly hair, the top hat, the eyes. He had rings that popped into his eye sockets that held his eyes open to give that like garish, disturbing, unsettling gaze. Talk about sacrifice. Oh my gosh, I don't know that I could do that.
It's kind of like putting a monocle in your eye where you hold it in with your skin around your eyes.
It was so fantastic and unreal that you couldn't take it seriously.
The people who made it obviously didn't, and yet it was blamed for a murder in London. A man said he had been so terrified by Chaney, he had had a fit and murdered a woman in Hyde Park. His defense was rejected.
And my grandfather talks about remembering him going up into his room and secluding himself and calling him up occasionally and saying, "Hey, what do you think of this?" Or what? And he would certainly go through a lot of pains to perfect the role.
Out of a small little kit, these 1,000 faces emerged. It was just incredible the way he changed himself.
This was Lon Chaney's makeup box. To many makeup artists, this is the Holy Grail. This is the makeup case that he created his 1,000 faces with. He started using this case in 1919 and used it until his death in 1930. It was originally a mechanic's toolbox.
There he is, Lon F. Chaney, Hollywood, California. Wow, it's extraordinary. Holy relics. What's in here, Ben?
This is one of the glass eyes that Chaney had especially made.
It's particularly gruesome in its own little box, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, I kind of grew up with the stories of the lengths he went to create these things. He put himself through an unbelievable amount of pain.
And that's an example of that. And to wear something that thick, of a covering over almost your entire eye, couldn't have been comfortable.
It's not exactly permeable lens,
no,
is it?
No,
it's like putting
not.
a billiard ball in your eye.
Mm-hmm.
He could do so much with so little, and he put just the right amount in the right place, for the right character. And that's something I always tried to do with my work. Again, it wasn't so much as like, how much can I put on this guy, but what is really essential to make this character work. And he truly was a man of 1,000 faces. You can watch films with Chaney and not know he's there, and with just subtle paint changes that he does in his face. It's incredible.
When I look at my own 16 to 18-hour days that I pull, having a team do my face, I cannot imagine starting the day with a 6-hour makeup job that I'm doing on myself and then go to work and act that part out. To have that kind of energy and that kind of passion, the passion he had, and the sacrifices he made for his art and for his characters. He would suffer discomfort and suffer absolute torture that most human beings would never sit through or go through to create a character because it needed it. Sacrifice just becomes a part of the gig when you are a character actor playing fantasy characters. It just is. You do become unaware of your surroundings when your mind when you're doing your acting job, when your acting is focused on the scene you're in. So that's what you have to do as a character actor in these crazy suits and makeups, is to make it about the moment and not about the pain. Lon Chaney was a master of that.
One of the very few who ever saw the makeup develop was assistant director Willard Sheldon, who watched him create an aged Chinese for an MGM film called Mr. Wu.
Now, this is something we can't do today. But back in that day, no one knew any better. Why not make him a Chinese man?
When he did the old Chinese character, Mr. Wu, he was different ages of Mr. Wu, but the oldest age, when I first saw pictures of him, how the heck did he do this?
Not only did Lon play Mandarin Wu, but he also played Grandfather Wu, two distinctly different characters. Lon Chaney had a very handsome jawline, a very manly jawline, with good muscles back here.
It was really clever. He had this like shawl over his head that actually kind of thinned his face. I think he must have even glued it to his face to create a very narrow, thin face.
It hid the strong jawline back here, the musculature of his strong jawline. Just something so subtle as moving a hood up to here to hide all this. It made his face look so much thinner, more emaciated, more drawn. That was the most simple fix, and it was just brilliant, and it totally worked.
So what he did, he got on a streetcar, and he took a seat at the back end of the streetcar. He stayed in that streetcar till it reached the end of the line. He didn't care where it was going. At the end of that time, not one person took him for anything but what he appeared to be, an old Chinese laundryman.
In the Lon Chaney's final silent film proved to be Thunder. It has also been lost for many years. He played Grumpy Anderson, an old-time engineer who will take his train through hell or high water, but refuses to hitch on a private car for a nightclub singer. He caught a cold but kept on working in true Chaney fashion. The cold developed into walking pneumonia.
Some mornings he'd show up very late, very apologetic. Nobody really knew how sick he was. And finally, as the picture neared an end, he had to stay out for several days at a time. And finally, the picture was shut down, I think for a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and then picked up again. But I don't think anybody on the company realized how terribly sick he was.
Sound had arrived, and Chaney resisted it. He wouldn't talk, he said, because it might destroy the mystery. MGM made a musical with all their stars except Garbo and Chaney, but Chaney had a number devoted to him. Universal wanted him urgently for Dracula. MGM gave Chaney a large bonus for signing a new contract, and Irving Thalberg chose his first sound film.
And so they picked The Unholy Three as Chaney's talking picture debut.
The man of 100 golden voices, Professor Echo.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you. Now, folks, if you'll just gather around a little closer now. Come right in a little closer. That's it. That's fine. That's fine, folks. Now, then, if you'll be real quiet, I'll see if I can get the little boy to say something.
Lon had a great voice, and he had a great voice when he was on the stage because he was stage trained.
The Unholy Three fascinated me a bit because this is his only talkie sound movie that he did.
Fantastic. The Unholy Three. Understand?
Here he was playing a grandmother with this little old lady wig on, and just to watch his transformation in that, from the crime ringleader...
The cops will be here any minute. But when they do, they won't find no Mrs. O'Grady here.
...to the old lady, he channeled it.
Well, we had put the baby to bed.
In the final scene, as reshot, Echo says farewell at the railroad station to Hector, Elliot Nugent, and Rosie, Lila Lee. By now, Chaney knew he had lung cancer.
Well, I guess Rosie wants to talk to you now, so I'll say goodbye.
Well, goodbye, kid. Good luck.
Irony of ironies. Here's the man who is, through this film, Harry Earls told me he was struggling to get along because of his health. There were some days where he just didn't have the energy to get through the day. And Hector, as a way of saying thank you, gives him a carton of cigarettes.
I brought you some cigarettes.
Oh, swell. Thanks, kid.
I don't know whether to laugh or cry.
Well, why don't you do a little of both? You know the old judge. That's all there is to life. Just a little laugh, a little tear.
It fades to black and we see the end. That was Lon's last performance on the silver screen.
The tragic part of this whole thing is that's the last time we heard his voice.
I'll send you a postal card.
But wow, what he was able to do with that, he made the transition from silent film.
7 weeks after the film was released, Chaney died. He was 47 years old. The funeral service was held at the Cunningham and O'Connor Funeral Home in downtown Los Angeles. The eulogy was given by the chaplain of the Marine Corps base at San Diego. Hazel Chaney was in a state of collapse.
All studios in Hollywood halted work to observe a moment of silence.
When he came in with the news, I couldn't take it in. I did think the end of the world had come. No more Lon.
The day he died, when I was 10 years old, was the end of the world. I thought, my God, Lon Chaney died here in 1930, and I'm only 10 years old. If he can die, that means me too. Huh? Nothing's safe. If this great man, this man taller than all the buildings in the world, who represents all the people in the world, if he can be taken away by death, then I'm vulnerable. And that was a terrible feeling to have.
Lon Chaney attains immortality, said a Screen magazine at the time. No man in pictures, nor woman either, has won the wide space in the popular heart that Chaney could call his own. There never was an actor whose every gesture carried more feeling, more eloquence than Chaney. He will be missed not only by the producers, but by the millions who took him into their hearts.
His most lasting legacy lies in his talent in makeup. The monster movie niche Chaney helped pioneer continued with Universal's horror pictures starring the likes of actors Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, and even his own son, Creighton, whose name was credited as Lon Chaney Jr. The makeup of many of these monsters were created by artist Jack Pierce, who was able to start his career due to the void Chaney's death left in the industry.
Had he lived, my gosh, just thinking what the man could have done.
If he wouldn't have died, I mean, he would have been perfect in sound films. I wish there were more.
Sinister, but with redemption. I think that seemed to be a running theme for Lon Chaney. He had a way of layering his characters with so much story and intention that you had to feel sympathy for them.
I think what really attracted me and so many people of my generation to these films was the humanity and the sympathy that you have for these characters. They're supposed to be monsters, you know. You feel for the fandom, you know. He's in love with Christine. It's not his fault that he looks the way he does and that people run in fear from him. And you felt his pain. And that's why I still like those films. They're not just a guy wearing a hockey mask who murders teenagers in every way he can. You know, it's you have sympathy for these characters. And Chaney was a master at that. You could see something in yourself in these guys. And it also kind of was comforting in a way, you know, to know that there was others like you.
He had this magnetic personality, even under makeup, that just came through and reached out to the audience. I think why people respond to Quasimodo or the Phantom of the Opera or Alonzo in The Unknown is we all have been at one point in our life or another been an outsider. And I think watching movies where there is this character that's an outsider, it allows the audience to kind of embrace that character, that they maybe they see a slight piece of themselves or they can relate to.
Lon could find the beauty in what others thought was ugly or hideous. The abnormal in something, in someone, could be where their beauty lies. And a beautiful quote that of his that resonates with me that I just love. He said, "I wanted to remind people that the lowest types of humanity may have within them the capacity for supreme self-sacrifice. The dwarfed, misshapen beggar of the streets may have the noblest ideals." I hope so. I think he's right.
Through actors such as Ron Perlman and Doug Jones, these types of roles continue today. However, never has there been someone so accomplished in both makeup and acting, being the singular creator of his character's appearance and soul. It's a true testament to his craft that in each of Chaney's thousands of faces, we see a bit of our own.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!